The eggs sat in a row on the windowsill, 12 of them, each one the pale blue of a robin's shell, and heavy enough that a grown man weighed them twice in his palm and swore the scale was broken. Outside, 3 men in pressed shirts stood by a truck with a Hatchery logo on the door, and each of them held a folded paper. He hoped a young woman living alone on a failing farm would be too tired to read closely. She read every word. And somewhere in the yard behind her, a rooster the color of old copper threw back his head and crowed, as if he already knew how the day would end. 4 years earlier, nobody in the county would have crossed the road to look at those birds. 4 years earlier, Marta Okoro was 26 years old and had just buried the only person who had ever believed in her. Her great-aunt Dessa had raised her from the age of 9 after the fever took Marta's parents in the same hard winter. And Dessa had done it on 80 acres of thin upland ground that the neighbors called, not unkindly but not kindly either, the place the good Lord forgot to finish. When Dessa died in her sleep in the spring of that year, she left Marta the land, a barn that leaned like a tired shoulder, a debt of $1,100 owed to the bank in town, and 12 chickens of a breed that nobody had raised on purpose in longer than anyone could remember. They were called Cloudland Blues, and there were, as far as the wide world knew, exactly 12 of them left, and every one of them lived in Marta's yard. They were not handsome birds, not by the standards the county admired. They were tall and rangy, slate gray, shading to a smoke color at the neck, with pale legs and a look in the eye that struck strangers as insolent. They laid slowly, where a good modern hen might give an egg a day through the warm months. A Cloudland Blue took her time. 3 eggs in a week if she felt like it, and she felt like it less often the hotter the summer grew. The county had long since traded such birds for the fast white layers the feed store recommended, birds bred to turn grain into eggs the way a machine turns coal into steam. A creature that ate all winter and gave you 3 eggs a week was, in the plain arithmetic of a struggling place, a mouth and not a hand. So when word went round that Dessa Okoro had left her whole strange menagerie to the quiet girl with the foreign name, the town did not offer condolences so much as advice. Sell the birds for the stew pot, they told her. Sell the land while a man would still pay for it. A young woman alone could no more hold that ground than she could hold back the weather. Marta listened and said little and went home and counted her hens. She counted them again the next morning before the sun was fully up, standing in the doorway of the leaning barn with a mug of black coffee going cold in her hands. 12. 9 hens and 3 roosters, though one of the roosters was old and walked with a hitch. She knew already, in the plain way. A person knows the size of their own trouble, that $1,100 was more money than the farm had seen at one time in a decade. The bank had given her until the 1st of December to make the first payment of $200, and December was 7 months off, and 7 months of 3 eggs a week was not going to make $200, no matter how she turned the numbers over in the dark. But Marta had a habit her great-aunt had drilled into her, a habit of looking at a thing twice before she called it worthless. The first look tells you what everybody already thinks, Dessa used to say in her slow accent that still carried the old country in it. The second look tells you what is true, so Marta looked twice at her hens. She noticed that they did not sicken the way the store birds sickened. In 9 years on that farm, she could not remember Dessa losing a single Cloudland Blue to the illnesses that swept through other coops. She noticed that they foraged, ranging the whole 80 acres and coming home fat on grasshoppers and clover, so that they ate barely half the grain the store birds needed. And she noticed the eggs, not the number of them. The eggs themselves, blue as a cold morning and huge, and when she cracked one into the pan, the yolk stood up orange and proud as a little sun. She did not yet know what any of that was worth. She only knew that a thing that survives, when everything around it dies, is not nothing, whatever the town believes. And she banked that knowledge low and quiet inside her the way you bank a coal under ash to keep it living through the night. The first person to tell her plainly that she was a fool was a man named Cutter Voss, who ran the largest hatchery in that part of the state, and drove a truck so clean it seemed to resent the roads. He came out to the farm in the second week before Dessa was a month in the ground, and he stood in the yard with his thumbs in his belt and looked at the birds the way a butcher looks at livestock. He had heard, he said, that Marta had come into some old stock. He was in the business of clearing out old stock. He would take all 12 off her hands, save her the feed, save her the trouble, and he would pay her a flat $2 a head. $24, he said the number, the way a man drops a coin into a beggar's cup, waiting to be thanked. Marta stood very still. She had learned, in a childhood where she was always the strange one, the orphan, the girl who talked funny, that stillness unsettles a certain kind of man more than argument. She let the silence stretch until Voss shifted his weight. Then she said, quietly, that she thought she would keep them a while. Voss laughed. It was not a cruel laugh which somehow made it worse. It was the laugh of a man who is certain, the way he is, certain the sun will rise, that a girl alone on a dying farm will come to her senses inside a season and sell to him for less than he was offering now. Suit yourself, he said. Feed's dear this year, you'll be back. And he drove his clean truck down the rutted road, and the dust hung in the air behind him a long time. That was the day Marta stopped thinking of the hens as a burden and started thinking of them as a wager. If Cutter Voss wanted them so badly, he would drive out here to buy them cheap. Then, they were worth more than he was saying, and a man like that only lowballs a thing he means to sell high. She did not know yet how he meant to sell them. But she meant to find out before he did. She began to keep the birds the way her aunt had, and then better. She read the 2 brittle notebooks Dessa had left, filled with a cramped hand and diagrams of which rooster had run, with which hen and which chicks had come out true to the old type. She had not understood, when Dessa was alive, that the old woman had been doing something careful and deliberate all those years, holding a bloodline together with nothing but patience and a good eye. Now Marta understood, and the understanding frightened her, because it meant that if she got it wrong, if she let the line blur, there would be no getting it back. 12 birds. That was the whole world's supply, and it was standing in her leaning barn eating clover. She rose before light every morning that summer, and worked until her hands went rough as bark. She patched the barn roof with tin salvaged from a fallen shed. She built proper nesting boxes and a run that would keep the foxes honest. She learned to read each hen, which ones laid the truest blue, which ones threw the biggest eggs, which rooster passed on the deep slate color, and which one threw chicks that came out muddy and wrong. She was not squeamish about it. A wager is a wager, and she meant to win. By June, she had set the first clutch of eggs under a broody hen, and she counted the days on her fingers in the dark the way other people counted money. She told no one. The town had already decided the birds were worthless, and it is a strange truth about people that they will fight harder to keep believing a thing than they ever fought to believe it in the first place. Let them think the hens were dying off. Let them think the girl was too stubborn to sell. There was a wisdom in the silence her aunt had taught her without ever saying it aloud. You do not show a card you cannot afford to have beaten. So Marta kept her coal banked low under the ash, and every 3 weeks a new clutch hatched, and slowly, chick by fragile chick, the 12 became 30, and the 30 became something a person might dare to call a flock. It was the old man across the valley who first said out loud that she was doing something worth doing. His name was Elias Brand, and he was near 80, an immigrant like Dessa had been, from a country of long winters, and he had known Marta's aunt for 40 years. He walked over one evening in July on a cane cut from his own apple tree and stood at the fence watching the birds settle for the night. For a long while he said nothing. Then he said, in his slow and careful English, that his grandmother had kept birds like these when he was a boy, an ocean away and a lifetime ago. Birds that lived when other birds died. Birds that a family could count on in a bad year precisely because they did not need much and did not fall sick. The fast birds, he said, are like borrowed money. They pay you well and quick, and then one bad winter they are all dead in a night, and you have nothing. The slow birds are like land. They pay you a little, every year, forever. and they cannot be taken away by weather. Land pays slow, and land pays sure, he said, and he tapped the fence rail once with a knuckle to seal it, the way an old man seals a truth. Marta carried those words home with her and set them beside the coal in her chest and let them warm together. Elias came often after that. He taught her things the notebooks could not, things that lived only in the hands and the eyes of a man who had done them. He showed her how to tell a fertile egg from a clear one by candling it against a lamp, how to read the color of a chick's down, to guess how it would feather out, how to call kindly and quickly, and never let a bird suffer for her squeamishness. He never once told her she was too young, or too alone, or too green for the work. He simply assumed she would do it. And there is a kind of faith in being assumed capable that is worth more than any amount of encouragement. Marta had not known, until Elias, how starved she had been for someone to treat her competence as a fact rather than a surprise. By the following spring, a year after Dessa's death, the flock stood at better than 100 birds, and Marta had made her first bank payment on time and her second early, selling eggs to the few neighbors who would buy them and a small handful of hatching eggs sent off in padded boxes to strangers in far-off cities who wrote to her because they had heard. 1. The whispering wires that connect people who love old and vanishing things, that the cloudland blue was not extinct after all, and that a young woman in the uplands had a dozen of them and was bringing them back. Those first letters astonished her. That anyone out in the wide world cared about her insolent gray birds seemed to her, in those early days, almost impossible to believe. The one who changed everything was not a stranger, though. It was a woman named Priya Nandi, and she was a cook. Not a home cook, but a chef. The owner of a restaurant 3 hours away in the city, the kind of place where people paid for a single plate of food more than Marta paid for a month of feed. Priya had grown up in a family that valued the taste of a thing over the speed of it, and she had spent years hunting for ingredients that the modern world had thrown away in its hurry. Someone had sent her one of Marta's blue eggs wrapped in newspaper, and she had cracked it into a hot pan and stood over it in silence. And then she had gotten into her car and driven 3 hours up into the hills to find the farm the egg had come from. She arrived on a gray afternoon and did not waste time with pleasantries. She asked to see the birds, and she walked among them, and she picked up eggs and weighed them in her hand and held them to the light. Then she asked Marta to cook her one, right there, and Marta did, in the old iron pan on the wood stove, and Priya ate it slowly with a spoon, standing up, saying nothing, and when she was done, she set the spoon down and asked how many eggs Marta could sell her in a week. That was the moment the coal caught air and became a small, clear flame, because Priya Nandi did not want the eggs cheap. She wanted them at a price that made Marta ask her twice to be sure she had heard right, and she wanted every single one Marta could spare, and she wanted them for years. A thing is worth, Marta understood then, exactly what someone who knows its value will pay, and the town had never known the value because the town had never looked twice. Priya looked twice for a living, and what she saw on that plate in the failing light of Marta's kitchen was worth, to her, more than the whole town had ever offered for the entire flock. Word of that arrangement leaked out slowly, the way water finds its way through stone. It began when Marta paid off the last of the bank debt well ahead of the schedule, and the teller, who could not keep a secret to save her life, mentioned it to her sister, who mentioned it to a neighbor, who mentioned it at the feed store where all the news of the county was ground fine. The girl on the forgotten farm had paid off Dessa's whole debt in less than 2 years. On chickens. On the worthless blue chickens that Cutter Voss had offered to take off her hands for $2 a head. The town did not know what to make of it. Some of them decided she must have had money hidden away, an inheritance nobody knew about. Others decided she had cheated somebody, though they could not say whom. A few, the honest ones, came out to the farm to look for themselves, and they stood at the fence, where Elias liked to stand, and watched more than 100 slate-gray birds foraging fat and healthy across the green upland, and they felt the strange discomfort that comes over people when they realize they may have laughed at the wrong thing. It is easier to believe a bird is worthless than to admit you were wrong to mock the girl who kept it. But the eggs were on Priya Nandi's menu, now described in words that made the county's cheeks go warm when the newspaper reprinted them, and there is no arguing with a thing that has become fashionable in the city. Cutter Voss came back in the third summer. He came in a new truck this time, cleaner than the last, and he did not stand in the yard with his thumbs in his belt. He came smiling, with his hat in his hand, and he called Marta by her first name, as though they were old friends. He had heard, he said, the most remarkable things. He had always known there was something special in the old stock, he said, always had a soft spot for it himself, and he wanted to help her. That was the word he used, help. A young woman alone couldn't be expected to handle the demand that was surely coming. He had the incubators, the barns, the trucks, the contacts at every feed store in 3 counties. He proposed a partnership. He would buy breeding rights to the Cloudland Blue, take the birds into his big clean operation, flood the market, make them both rich. He named a number, and it was a large number, larger than Marta had ever held, and he watched her face while he said it the way he had once watched it when he offered $2 a head. Marta stood very still. She understood exactly what he was offering, because she had spent 3 years learning the arithmetic of the thing he did not think she understood. If she let Cutter Voss have the breeding rights, he would put the birds in cages and cross them with his fast layers to make them lay quicker. And inside 5 years, the Cloudland Blue that Dessa had held together for a lifetime would be gone, blurred and bred out and drowned in the market until it was worth nothing again. And Marta would have her lump of money, and Voss would have destroyed the only thing that had ever made the money possible. That was the shape of the wager he was offering. Sell the future for the present, sell the land for the borrowed money, and call it help. She told him, no, she told him plainly, and without heat, the way Elias had taught her to state a fact. Voss's smile stayed on his face, but went dead behind the eyes, and he said, in a voice gone suddenly soft and reasonable, that she should think hard about it, because the demand for a thing like this was a fragile business, and prices could fall, and a bad year could come, and a woman alone with all her eggs in one basket, so to speak, might find herself wishing she had taken a sure offer when she had the chance. It was not quite a threat. It was the cousin of a threat. Then he drove away, and the dust hung in the road, and Marta stood watching it and felt, for the first time in a long time, afraid. The bad year came the next spring, though not in any shape Cutter Voss could have arranged. It came as a sickness. A disease swept through the poultry of the whole region that year, a fast and merciless thing carried on the wind and on the wheels of trucks, and it moved through the county like a fire through dry grass. It hit the big operations hardest, the crowded barns full of the fast white birds packed close together, the borrowed money birds that paid well and quick and then died all in a night. Cutter Voss lost tens of thousands of them in a matter of weeks, and had to burn the bodies in pits that sent black smoke over the valley for days. The feed store birds died. The backyard flocks died. Everywhere in the county there was grief and disinfectant and the smell of loss, and men who had laughed at the slow gray birds now stood in empty yards where their fast ones had been. Marta did not sleep for a week. She sealed the farm off. No visitor, no truck, no borrowed tool crossed her fence line. She burned the clothes she wore to town. She candled and counted her birds by lamplight in the dark hours, working the arithmetic of survival over and over, and every morning she braced herself to find them fallen, and every morning they were there, slate gray and insolent and alive. The disease that emptied the county's barns broke against the Cloudland Blue like a wave against a stone. Whatever was in that old blood, the hardiness her aunt had held together for a lifetime, the thing Elias's grandmother had prized an ocean, away, it held. The slow birds lived because they had never been anything but survivors. Because that was the whole reason such birds had once existed at all, before the world grew impatient and forgot them. When the smoke cleared and the quarantines lifted, the county woke to a changed world. The fast birds that fed the region were gone, and it would take a year or more to rebuild the flocks. And in the meantime, every hatchery and farmer who wanted to start again needed one thing above all others: breeding stock that would not die. living birds, healthy birds. And there was one flock in the whole part of the state that had come through the plague without losing a single bird, and it belonged to the quiet young woman on the farm. The good Lord forgot to finish, the woman everyone had told, to sell for the stew pot 4 years before. They came to her then, all of them. They came the way people always come when the thing they scorned turns out to be the thing they need. Hatcheries wrote her letters and then sent men, and the men parked their trucks along her rutted road and stood at her fence with folded papers in their hands. And every paper was a contract, and every contract was written by someone who hoped a young woman living alone on a farm would be too overwhelmed by her sudden good fortune to read it closely. They offered her sums that 4 years before would have seemed like the wealth of kings. They offered her partnerships and exclusive rights and clean barns in the city, and a life without the labor that had made her hands rough as bark. Cutter Voss came too, of course, 3 days after the quarantine lifted, before the others, and this time he did not smile, and he did not threaten. This time there was something almost like fear under his courtesy, because he had lost nearly everything, and he knew now, as they all knew, exactly what the 12 forgotten birds had been worth all along. And that is the morning the story began. The 12 blue eggs on the windowsill, the 3 men by the truck with their folded papers, the old copper rooster crowing in the yard, as if he already knew. Marta read every word of every contract, sitting at the kitchen table with a pencil, taking 2 days to do it while the men waited and fretted and offered her more. And then she did a thing that none of them expected, a thing that Cutter Voss, in particular, could not understand at all. She did not sell to the highest bidder. She did not take Voss's mountain of money, though it was the largest sum on the table, because she knew what he would do with the birds, and she had not held the line for 4 years to watch a stranger blur it away in 5. But neither did she do what a harder woman might have done, which was to hoard the flock and name a cruel price and squeeze the desperate county for every dollar its grief could bear. She had watched hunger change a place that year. She had seen proud men come to her fence with their hats in their hands, men who had mocked her, men whose children needed the eggs that used to be beneath them. And she remembered being 9 years old, and strange and orphaned, and taken in by a woman who could have turned her away and did not. So she did the thing her aunt would have done, the thing Elias tapped into the fence rail on a July evening years before. She treated the birds like land, and she meant to let them pay slow and sure and forever, and she meant to let them pay more than just herself. She called a meeting. She, who 4 years before could not make herself speak up to a smiling man in a clean truck, stood up in the Grange Hall in town, before the whole county, and spoke in a voice that did not shake. She would not sell the Cloudland Blue to any single hatchery, she said, and she would not let the line be crossed and blurred and lost because it was not hers to lose. It had been held for 40 years by an old woman who asked nothing for it, and before that by hands across an ocean, and it belonged, in the way that truly important things belong, to everyone who would keep it faithfully, and to no one who would spoil it. She would sell hatching eggs and started chicks to any farmer in the county who wanted to rebuild at a fair price, a price a struggling family could meet on the single condition that they keep the breed true and pass it on the same way. She would sell to the hatcheries too, the honest ones, at a fair price and under the same terms. And she would keep the heart of the flock herself on Dessa's 80 acres, and go on doing what her aunt had done, which was to hold the line and let it live. Cutter Voss stood up in the back of the hall and said, with the last of his wounded pride, that she was a fool, that she was leaving a fortune on the table, that no one alone could police such terms, and the line would blur anyway. Marta looked at him a long moment across the crowded room. She was not alone, she said. That was the mistake he had always made, the mistake the whole county had made about her, from the beginning. One person alone could not hold a breed against the whole hard world, but a county could. A county that had learned, at terrible cost, what the slow shorebirds were worth, and what came of scorning a thing you did not trouble to look at twice. She was not asking them to trust her. She was offering to bind them all together around a thing worth keeping, and there is no arithmetic a man like Voss can do against a whole town that has finally decided to protect what it once threw away. He sat down. He did not come to the farm again. That was some years ago now. The story is told the way true stories are told in that county, at kitchen tables and over fences, a little differently each time, but always ending the same way. The 80 acres the good Lord forgot to finish are green with clover and loud at dawn, with the crowing of slate-gray roosters. And across the whole part of the state now, there are flocks of cloudland blues on 100 farms, held true to the old type by families who signed Marta Okoro's fair and stubborn terms. The eggs go to Pry and Andy's tables still, and to city markets that pay well, and to the breakfast plates of the same farmers who once said the birds were a mouth and not a hand. Every hatchery in the state that wants the breed comes to Marta for it, and pays her fair and keeps her terms, because they have learned that fair and forever beats cheap and gone. Elias Brand lived long enough to see it, and he stood one last time at the fence he liked, and he tapped the rail with a knuckle, and he said again what he had said at the beginning, that land pays slow and land pays sure, and it cannot be taken away by weather. Marta keeps his cane now, hung above the kitchen door beside her aunt's brittle notebooks, and when a stranger asks her how she knew, when everyone laughed, that the forgotten birds were worth saving, she does not say anything clever. She only tells them what Dessa taught her, standing in a doorway with cold coffee going warm in the sun. The first look tells you what everybody already thinks. The second look tells you what is true. And then she goes out to count her hens, the way she does every morning, though there is no longer any debt to fear and no longer any doubt about the number. Because some things you keep counting not from worry but from love,